I thank the gentleman from Missouri for yielding, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the discussion that is here, because as we have all been home over the weekend and working in our districts, meeting with constituents, the economy is the #1 issue. And I have talked to so many people who are using the words that they are appalled, that they are horrified with what they see happening here. They are very concerned with what they see taking place with the economic policies of the new administration. And indeed, as someone said to me yesterday, a broker from one of our fine banks in Tennessee said to me yesterday, the stock market has voted on the Obama economic policies, on Pelosi-Reed and their economic policies, and they have obviously voted no, because the stock market was over 9,000 before this administration took control, and now we see where it is today at 6,700, and it is of great concern to us. We know our nation is in recession. We know that people are hurting. We know that they want to see something done. And most people fully realize that you cannot declare a war on prosperity and get yourself out of a recession. And as you both, Ms. Fox and the gentleman from Missouri, have both recognize the quote from Henry Morgenthau and the importance of that it does not work, that this kind of spending does not work. I brought a chart along that I felt like was important to the discussion that we are having. As my colleagues know, the Democrats took control of this body in January '07. And we see where we were with the federal deficit, the green line. The orange line is discretionary spending, and mandatory spending is in the blue. Now, we continue to hear from the leadership, from Speaker Pelosi, from Leader Reed, and from the President, that they inherited this debt. They inherited an annual deficit. But I think it's important to note that they have voted yes on all of this. That has pushed our spending. You can see what has happened with the spending in the past year alone. But Stimulus 1 was $152 billion. You see where it comes there in '08. The pre-TARP funds, that was from March to September of '08, $323 billion. TARP. The auto bailout, Stimulus 2, which was the $787 billion. The omnibus, which was $410 billion. Now, what we have seen happen over with the spending is by the end of '07, the Democrat-led House had moved our same year mandatory spending from $3 billion to $37 billion, and by the end of '08, they increased that number to $333 billion. So they would, I would gladly yield to the lady.
I would reclaim my time and yield. I'm the one that's supposed to do this part of the dinner conversation here. Being the father and the guy who serves the food at our dinner table, would recognize
I yield my time to the gentleman
from North Carolina.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman from Missouri yielding. I was trying to make this point today, and I think it's so important that you've brought this up. Let us remind the American people, the Democrats took control of the Congress in January of 2007. Do you remember what I remember, that we had 54 straight months of job growth up until January of 2007? Do you remember that number?
Yes, I would yield to the lady from Tennessee.
And thank the gentleman for yielding. Indeed, you're exactly right. We had had jobs growth. We had had economic growth. It was basically unparalleled. The 2001 and '03 tax reductions had worked. We had not seen this kind of growth since Ronald Reagan. But as the chart points out, you can look at where the federal deficit was, at $8 trillion. You can look at where discretionary spending was placed and where our mandatory spending, this blue line, was placed. Now, what we see is the mandatory spending alone, they grew from $3 billion to $333 billion in a 2-year period of time. So you can see what is happening with our spending, whether it is our discretionary or our mandatory spending. It is going through the roof. And of course, that runs our federal deficit and our national debt up. This year alone, we're at over $2 trillion in a deficit, and our president has just proposed a $3.5 trillion budget. So we know what is going to continue to happen to these lines. You can look at the CBO scoring and see the CBO is a nonpartisan organization. You can look at what is happening in their scoring and see that we're going to have trillion-dollar deficits as far as we can see with the type spending that we have brought forth, and I yield back.
Reclaiming my time, the gentlelady from Tennessee has a very, very effective chart. And what you're pointing out is that we are in uncharted waters. We have not dared to take and swallow this much debt in the past. I was struck, I was trying to put some kind of a handle on what we passed just a couple of weeks ago on this House floor on about, I think it was, what was it, $840 billion. Now, I don't make that much money, so what is $840 billion? So I tried to think, well, what's something